Good afternoon and welcome back to the Landmarks Preservation Commission's public hearing and public meeting of September 12th, 2023. We are returning after the lunch break and we will be resuming with public hearing item number 8. And I will turn it over to Corey Halala to take us through the afternoon items.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. We'll start with public hearing item number 8, LPC 23-10705. This is an application for a binding report in the borough of Manhattan, multiple blocks and multiple lots in the South Street Seaport Historic District. This is a maritime and mercantile historic district with buildings ranging in date from the late 18th through early 20th centuries. And the application is to establish a master plan governing the future installation of landscaping light poles, plaques, and wayfinding signage at select areas within the district.
Good afternoon, Chair Carroll, Commissioners. I'm George Giaquinto. I'm the Senior Vice President of Development for Howard Hughes. We're here today to discuss that master plan of really experiential improvements to the Seaport. I'm presenting with Zenobia Meckley of Future Greene, who was our landscape architect, Carlos Garcia from Observatoire, who is our lighting designer, and Don Bildo from Pentagram, who is the identity and wayfinding consultant. Also today with us is our partner, President CEO of South Street Seaport Museum, Jonathan Boulware, who's here. Jonathan worked with us on this plan throughout. There are elements of this plan, the historical plaques that you'd see that are actually, our role is very limited to the benefactor. We will fund and install those for Jonathan, but all the work on the plaques were really done by Jonathan and his team at the Seaport Museum. The plan addresses 3 areas of concern identified in feedback from our visitors, our neighbors, and our businesses: comfort, safety, and direction. We have also observed actions taken in other parts of the city, and we'll show through precedents what visitors encounter in other neighborhoods throughout the city. The plan addresses these concerns with improvements to seating, landscaping, street lighting, identity, and wayfinding. We will review each of these elements in the presentation and are prepared to review proposed location plans. But just keep in mind that besides street lighting and directories, we've actually designed these things to be pretty flexible. As you may know, we actively program the public spaces, and we have things from holiday and community events, the Seaport, the Taste of the Seaport's coming up in a couple of weeks, fitness classes, charity walks. So we're constantly programming the public space, to keep the public interested in coming back. It's really a huge part of the success of the Seaport. In terms of our agency approvals, just real quickly, we've worked with DOT staff on the street lighting for the DMAP streets only. We were able to propose the changes we wanted to make as long as we maintain the poles and supply the electric. With respect to the map streets, we had wanted to propose changes to the street lighting on the south side of Beekman, essentially from Water to South, and on the west side of South Street from John to Beekman. That process, because those are active streets, the DOT process is much more involved. And it's even questionable whether DOT will allow a light pole to be different from the ones that are in their guidelines, essentially. So we are not proposing on those 2 streets today. You won't see that in the proposal. We've also worked with staff. We've reviewed the plans with city planning and are working on a substantial compliance package with them once we get through LPC to essentially update the plans for the waterfront public access and public access areas that this project affects. So we commenced the exploratory design on this prior to COVID, and we've waited some time now to try to come back and implement the plan. As you know, it's been about a little over a year since the tin building opened. And so we wanted to see if the opening of the tin building, the sort of clearing of that part of the street had really changed people's minds. But the feedback we continue to get is really the same. A sense of direction, some more comfort, and some better lighting. So while you see like Fulton is our main thoroughfare, I think everybody understands that. As you cross water and you get to the corner of Fulton Water, people are still need a sense of reinforcement, a sense of direction. You have the FDR, which sort of blocks people's view of the pier and the tin building. And so, that in itself has really led us to want to provide at least some form of or threshold identity and wayfinding at that point. If you enter from the north or the south here, typically you're entering on front. As you know, front at Fulton Bends, it's sort of offset. And so you can't see through. And so there again, people become disoriented and are looking for some sense of direction. With respect to lighting, I'll just move forward. As you can see, it's a, as my Australian friends would say, a bit of a dog's breakfast. There are the larger poles that are on the corners of the DMAP streets, a smaller pole that are in clusters in between those streets. And then on the active streets, you have the Cobras and the Bishop's Crook. What this results in is really pockets of light and darkness. And in the darkness, we are under DOT regulations. And so we're looking to improve that, provide a more consistent set of lighting throughout the district. In terms of precedents, it's been our observation to watch neighborhoods throughout the city, as they've improved their landscaping and softened their neighborhoods with seating and umbrellas. We've seen where people, where these different entities, I should say, are providing directional signage, elements of shade. And then, as we looked at the landscape, the landmarks historic lamppost designation report, it was not unusual to have different lamppost designs in different neighborhoods. In fact, I think there was some in 1930, there were some 76 different types of poles in New York City. And so while that was mostly guided at the time by the ownership of the poles and the ownership of the distribution of electric, as referenced in the report, it was a sense of delight and pride throughout the city, and something that sort of intrigued us as we were doing our research on this project. Finally, just another example of sort of the identity threshold identities that you see in areas across the city, and that we're looking to implement as well. So with that, maybe we talk about the material palettes.
Good afternoon. So I will start by talking about the landscape material palette, and then turn it over to Dawn to talk about the wayfinding materials. But as you can see along the bottom of the slide, our materials are really grounded in the materiality of the site itself. All of the materials represented there at the bottom are photos taken from around the district. And we pulled from those to really inform the design of the pieces that you'll see later in the presentation, the sort of landscape furniture and planters. But looking at this really distinctive palette of wood, which really happens at the water side of the district, and then moving inland to the sort of harder materials of granite cobble and bluestone walkways. We looked to choose materials that were durable but that were of the character and quality of those. And so for the furnishings themselves, we landed on a precast concrete with wood accents. And a really special aggregate, which is an oyster shell aggregate that speaks to the kind of history of Pearl Street as it was once paved with crushed oyster shells. And then these accents of really durable, hard stone that are in keeping with the sort of the identity of the district. We've also got other moments of kind of stone and a dark metal that will relate to the palette that Dawn speaks to, that are more accents. But again, the primary materials are these precast concrete with oyster shell aggregate and wood accents.
So for the signage, one of the things that we found very influential is that the area is, very maritime, very nautical, and also very industrial. And of course, there's the rich history of the area as well. And so as designers, when we think about the forms and the colors and the materials of signage, we take these things as our influence. And so in looking at ships and telescopes and bollards, you'll see in a few moments, our signage designs are kind of those elements and of the space and the place. Our materials are black and stainless steel, wrought irons, anodized aluminums, copper, reversed etched zinc, excuse me. These are all materials and finishes that are, in our opinions, of a nautical variety. And the sign layouts and messaging are very high contrast, black on white or white on black for the messaging. Sorry, let's see.
Yeah, see if you can. Oh.
So really quickly, we're also very much about embedding signage wherever possible. And you'll see in some of the solutions a little later on, particularly for identifiers, you'll see embedded identifiers in the ground as opposed to having big threshold markers that are really unnecessarily large sometimes. Sorry.
So now we'll take you through each of the design elements.
Yeah. So you can see here, these are some visualizations of how that material takes form in this kit of parts, furniture and planters. At the top, George mentioned our priorities were comfort, safety, and direction. And so the landscape elements really look to build comfort into the district in the form of seating so that people can find places to rest and linger in the district, in the form of planters, where we can get a little bit of relief from the vast amounts of hardscape through these green seasonal plantings. Let's see if I can get through. So I'll kind of walk through these quickly. It's a pretty large set of elements, and they're all building on one system that are scaled to fit each of the individual spaces that they will occupy. So you see sort of a theme here of square modules that can fit together and build. In the lower right, you see that the seating can gang up with the planting to create that nice relationship. The largest of our planters is big enough to hold a tree, so that we can start to bring in a little bit of shade, but also some of that sort of comforting green canopy, and break down the spaces into a more human scale. And the largest of our pieces is this 8x8 platform with an integrated planter. So it holds the sort of largest volume of soil for our larger trees. On the Seaport side, on the water side of the district, we have a couple of special elements, a shade structure that, in addition to the trees, will bring a little bit of thermal comfort to a space that is pretty exposed. And then some custom seating that is double-sided that will kind of bridge Pier 16 and Pier 17. There are a couple of off-the-shelf elements that round out the furnishing palette. Some seating elements to complement the custom pieces, and then trash receptacles and bike racks to bring a sense of cohesion throughout the district.
And then in terms of lighting, I think following the words from George of safety and direction as well as comfort, we also work on a pole that will be able to be scattered throughout the district, not just illuminating some street more than others to create some level of safety due to the lack of lighting that we observed during our extent review of the current condition. And we then design this pole that is very inspired in previous landmark poles that were included in New York, or they were designed for New York district, in which we are working with the same palette and materiality with this matte black metal and a brass tip that will be able to provide further illumination, not only to the street, because it's not only to the floor level or to the street level, but also to the vertical plane, the brick wall of the adjacent buildings, to create safety on the vertical level of illumination, which is right now not taking care on the district. We do have this palette of different pole. For the uplands, we've been working with this marching pole that is 14 feet, similar to the existing landmark pole. And then just closer to the Fulton Plaza, we are exploring different pole, variation of the pole that we had, that single pole to 3 pole heads. That will provide further illumination for additional activities that will take place along the Fulton Plaza. And that will also create a sense of destination gathering in a place that right now is currently underneath or not illuminated.
So for the wayfinding signs, you can see we have a staggered bladed pole, and the pole itself is kind of based on the mast of a ship coming up, but also the telescope that I was showing you guys earlier. The blades themselves, the wayfinding message blades, are attached with a very industrial looking collar. Each blade can be rotated on the pole to a very specific position based on where the destination is related to the pole. And each pole can hold up to 4 messages. So you can see in the details on the top is the collar mounted blades. In the middle is one of these staggered pieces of the pole, and in the bottom we have a very industrial connector that's evocative of a bollard on the site with very large exposed bolts. There's also a neighborhood map as part of the program, which utilizes the same types of poles, albeit a little bit shorter, but with the copper caps. And a digital screen that contains neighborhood information. It will be a digital touchscreen where people can find different destinations within the neighborhood, within the shops. George, I knew I was going to screw this up. Is it the clicker or the mouse?
Oh.
So as I was saying about the embedded identifiers a while ago, we forewent the option of large scale identifiers to identify the district. Instead, we opted to do ground mounted embedded identifiers at key moments throughout the district that help you understand you're crossing a threshold, that you're now in the historic district, without saying it via a large type of sign that we felt was really unnecessary and even in some ways intrusive. So what you're seeing here is a etched and infilled Seaport text at the threshold along Fulton, and then in certain areas, and we can show you some location plans in a moment, we have smaller identifiers embedded into the sidewalks once you cross a street corner or a threshold through the various streets that connect. We also have a series of historical plaques that are slated to replace the existing historical plaques in the neighborhood. They're mostly in the same positions that they currently are. And these are steel signs that are attached right over top where the old sign used to be. And they would be adhesive to the structures with faux bolts that would look like they were bolted into the building proper, but they're actually not. They're actually adhesive onto the buildings instead of having true mechanical fasteners.
So we also worked in a few renderings that were helpful when we were trying to designate or identify what would be the marching pole layout, or how many poles we would need for the space. We were not only running lighting calculations to be able to designate where are the areas and what's the light level that will be required for just like meeting code compliance illumination. But also we wanted to make sure that aesthetically we were also understanding what will be that amount of light on the space. So we, as you can see here on Pearl Street, we want to make sure that it was not looking busy, yet it was providing enough illumination for the path and also on the facades. So we did another rendering, just looking more towards the FDR to be able to identify kind of quantity of poles that was still feeling safe and soft, but was the level of direction was not looking as busy as possible. And then we have another Fulton Street view looking up, in which we also can identify some of the landscape elements that were also coordinated with Future Greene and how those poles will look like. And then lastly, we had a couple of Fulton Plaza views, one from underneath the FDR, in which we were proposing to have these a little bit higher poles with 3 heads that will create more general illumination on the plaza for activities, and also on the left side of the street, walking towards the Pier 17 along the driveway. And so these were also giving us a sense of how many light and how will be visual speaking the illumination of the space.
Okay, so we were given the opportunity to build a couple of scale mock-ups and a physical prototype. What you see on the far left is a scale prototype in the actual materials that were proposed for the furnishings. And then on the 2 images on the right are not in the actual materials, but are of the scale and configuration that we were proposing. Both of these exercises were extremely helpful in making sure that the materiality was right. We had the prototype, but also a series of a variety of samples in different colors and different densities of aggregate that really helped us to kind of get closer to what the appropriate material would be. And then in the scaled mock-ups, these were incredibly useful in right sizing the different elements. So after this exercise, we went back to our kit of parts and really scaled them more appropriately to the space. We had a series of, I think there were 4x4 elements, both on Fulton and on the waterfront side. And it was clear that the 4x4 was appropriately scaled on the water side. The space there is vast enough to accommodate that, but it felt a little bit tight when we got across this South Street to Fulton. And so we reworked from there based on these scale studies. You can also see the shade structure, prototype, a mock-up of that, and how it is has a presence, but is not an oppressive structure. And ultimately, with the rope infill, will provide a bit of comfort for folks occupying the plaza.
Same to the landscape elements. We were also working with the team on fabricating one head mock-up to be able to identify what are the things that are working and what are the things that are kind of like, it was very necessary to see this element in place to be able to identify things like finishes and scale and the light illumination that was given. We were also, it was very helpful to have this picture close to or adjacent to an existing pole, as the image on the left, to be able to identify whether the scale was a little bit odd or higher, and be able to fine tune that not only from drawings, but also in real life. And then we also did that review and study at nighttime, in which we were trying to be able to see how the previous pole was just providing concentrated lighting just underneath the displays, but the pole, but not towards the facade or not towards the vertical plane. And the pole that we are designing, it's just providing a little bit more illumination towards the brick, kind of creating this richness on the material that we have on the Seaport, and also to be able to identify how we could illuminate, or how the blades and the signage will be illuminated when they are like under the pole. For us, one of the main items that was discussed and was clear when we did the mock-up was the element that we were designing in plan and in drawings. It was a little bit too big on scale. The head was a little bit too big on head in scale. So we have been working after the mock-up to be able to address all of these elements and go towards 15 to 20% reduction, which is the right pole on, like the pole on the right, that will be matching or will be a little bit more encompassed with the existing pole that we have right now.
So I can go through the location plans, Chair Carroll, if you'd like, or but since it was really a master plan and you're looking at the elements more than anything else, it's really.
I think what might, I mean, you could quickly go through the location plans, but I think what might be helpful is if there is, and I think I heard it in the presentations, that there's a strategy for the different types. So between the uplands and the water side. So on the uplands, I think it's the single poles, and on the water side, it's the poles with multiple fixtures. And then similarly, I think the shade structures are on the water side, but not on the upland side, right? I mean, that might be, if there's a methodology or to that might be helpful to walk through.
I just want to point out on the shade structure, right? We frequently deal with very windy days down there, and we've had a lot of issues with umbrellas. There's limited spaces where we can actually utilize umbrellas and not worry about having to open and close them all the time. If we leave them in public spaces, you know, the restaurants will run their umbrellas the way they want, and it's their risk. And so when we posed that issue to Future Greene, they came up with the design you see here. I know it's probably a little odd looking. It does use rope though, which is again part of sort of keeping with the theme of the Seaport. But it because it allows wind to pass through, we could leave it out there all the time and not really worry about the issue of umbrellas. So I want to point that out.
Okay.
But as you can see, this is sort of a blow up of the furniture plan. The one before this is just a scale drawing to give you a sense of what everything looks like in scale. As we get to the detail, we sort of blow it up a little bit so that you can get a better sense of what the plan is. Again, all of the furniture here is this is just the landscape pieces. All of it is mobile. Everything is movable, either through forklift or by physically carrying. If we go to the lighting design, so you see where the light poles are. We didn't distinguish on this, but I will on the next one of where wayfinding is on those. But really, the key here is just to provide a consistent level of light throughout, and the frequency of the poles are really as Carlos said, the analysis he did was to not create very bright spots on the street, but just one equal level of light that actually meets DOT's regulations. Particularly here in the what we call the uplands, DOT, as part of their approval, had to review the lighting levels and model. Carlos's model was given to DOT, and they've signed off on that. And then the wayfinding, the sort of purple signs you see are where we're utilizing light poles, existing light poles. And then the sort of lighter, almost burnt orange, are just individual poles that are added. You see those are on the streets where we don't have lighting proposed. Essentially, the sort of aqua blue, if you will, are the small identifiers, and then the purple are the larger identifiers that Don presented. And then the directory locations are all the approved locations that were done in 2013, except for one location here at Beekman in front that would be added. But there was an approval. It was a different directory, digital directory that was in, I think, 2013. It was a very large directory. We could show you pictures of it if you prefer to see it. But we're mimicking those locations here in the uplands, except for that one additional location in front. And then, as Don said, we are really essentially with the historical plaques replacing where plaques were. I think there was dates back to, I think, the 80s when the plaques were put in, and they faded and are hard to read. And so we're actually working with the museum to restore those. And then here we are in on the east side of South Street. It's important to note that we really can't use this south area of the what we call the access drive because of waterfront public access requirements. So that really needs to be kept clear. So all of the planting essentially and lights are on this side, and I'll just take you through that. You see, we're using some of the existing benches that we have today and just adding greenery inside those benches, as well as augmenting with planters. There's the lighting plan that Carlos showed you with the three-headed poles. Really, the big thing is lighting this plaza so that people can use it at night. Right now, there's a very low level of light there. And then lighting the drive. We have, unfortunately, a very frequent number of people who sort of fall off the curb here, and it's not, as someone suggested to me, because of drinking. It's really the light levels, and the curb is hard to negotiate. And so improving the light along this drive is pretty important to us. Again, you see the wayfinding here. Again, trying to utilize the poles as much as possible. And then there's one directory location right at the top here. That wasn't in the 2013 approval. And that's it.
Okay, that was helpful. Thank you. And just a little bit of housekeeping for the record. Can you introduce the team?
Sorry.
Yeah.
So Don Villado is from Pentagram. Carlos Garcia is from L'Observatoire, and Zenobia Meckley is from Future Greene.
Great. Thank you. All right. Questions? Yes, Vice Chair Bland.
It seems as if the lighting idea is not only to provide light, which I understand, knowing it pretty well, but it also seems to be, since you're using a custom fixture, a branding of the district. And I'm just wondering, are there other districts in the city of New York anywhere where we've used lighting, a custom fixture to, I would say, brand a district? Are you aware of?
The districts that they were using branded were the ones that were from the landmark that were from the past, and they're reutilizing those as a mean of keeping the past. But not in New York City, new poles that are being used as a branded, but in.
Yeah, I'm even wondering about Rockefeller Center. I mean, they have lighting on the building integrate.
Have the lighting within the facade. You have like a wall pack.
Right.
Martin all around.
I'm trying to link this with the history of New York a little bit more than it seems to me right now to be.
They've done these like the Diamond District or like by Midtown District. They have actually kind of given a twist of the pole, and they have like a glowing element, or they have like a distinctive element to it, to a typical pole. But it will be an attachment to a typical pole, or just like the gateway, like I was mentioning on the Diamond District.
Right.
They do have these kind of diamond shape tops at the beginning and at the end.
And many years ago, I know in the maybe early 70s, even a new pole was fashioned for Central Park. It was, but then luminaire has been used in other places. It's a beautiful fixture, but I guess it was originally designed to be specifically for. So help me if there are others.
No, they've done modification to an existing fixture at Corona Park. They do have a pole that goes all along the bridge and the esplanade. They do have that. So that there has been cases in the history of New York in which there has been a twist of an existing fixture or a typical pole fixture to be able to conquer it for the specific district or for that area to make it more for themselves. So there is examples of that indeed.
Okay, thank you.
Which in that case, I guess that what we've been trying to bring here to the district is bring in some of the history of the existing poles that were existing, and that the green ones that we were reviewing that were like compared next to each other, to be able to use that, see what was actually working, what is actually not working on those poles, and then be able to like upgrade them or create like a still distinctive within the district, but not typical. But even those poles are not part of the typical, like the green poles that you were reviewing before, they're not typical within the catalogs, and they're not like the landmark typical in New York.
Understand. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Jefferson.
You've given us a kind of a language or a palette for your master plan, which is great. What I don't see, and all the elements are kind of temporary. They're all placed, seem to be moved, scenographic. Nothing is permanent. And I'm wondering, say the landscaping, why are the trees not in the ground? Why are they all so movable? I think it's shiftable. I think it's impermanent.
Well, for two reasons. So typical tree industry takes up about 5 feet by 2 feet, 3 feet, 5 by 10. So that really would severely limit our ability to sort of free up for charity walks, the streets, and it would sort of interrupt the flow on the sidewalk, because our obligation under our lease is, regardless if we have a charity walk, for instance, down Fulton Street, where we keep the whole street open for people, we have to keep the sidewalks open to the public as well. So it becomes a flexibility issue for us. But more than that, there was a study done by Future Greene, and I apologize for not having it in the appendix, but given that there's 2 subway lines that run under Fulton, sheds and areas for the MTA, Con Ed's steam lines, Con Ed's gas lines. There is probably 3 spots, 3 very small areas in the uplands area where we could actually plant a tree. And so that's why we, to get the trees, we thought and to provide a bit of a rhythm to it, we thought using the planters were best. And obviously we can't plant them out on the pier.
Conceptually, the approach is one of flexibility, infinite flexibility, because they're modular. And a kind of a scenographic effect with the lighting, right? Is that the conceptual effect? And then the graphics on the ground, is that if we accept the graphics in the ground, is it always going to be as we show it in a square or rectangular pattern next to a kind of a rough texture. Is that the approach that we would see?
Yeah, the idea is that it's actually.
Yeah.
The idea is that it's carved into the stones of the crosswalk for the larger ones that you're seeing in purple here. And for the smaller ones that are the red dots. Sorry, this is the lighting plan. Sorry, so the blue marks on the two thresholds of Fulton are carved directly into the stone. The smaller brown dots that you're seeing are embedded into the sidewalks. They're smaller panels about this big that are made out of reverse cut zinc, which is very much like stainless steel, a very permanent sign embedded directly into the ground.
Yes, Commissioner Ginsburg.
So I have two questions. One, of the light fixtures meet dark sky requirements?
Yeah, the lighting fixtures are back-rated with the lighting shining down.
Thank you. And the other question, and I realize this is not totally under your control, but as somebody who's walked and biked around, you've got a active bike path and people crossing it, and it's not that safe. And I don't know, that may all be DOT, but looking into try and make that a safer crossing would be a good idea.
But and safe and because of the cars passing.
No, but I'm talking about the bikes. Where,
But I'm saying, you're saying it's not safe because the cars passing or just the pedestrian
no,
traffic?
pedestrians crossing the bike
Yeah.
path.
We are, so we are looking at some advanced technology that will activate lights for stopping and warning people. But as we start to look at the implementation of that, it's very difficult because there's like, you're right, there is a great deal of traffic, bike traffic, and there's motorized bikes now, and so it's difficult. I will say that you probably have seen, we keep a guard at each entry, security guard at each entry, and they stop traffic when cars come in and out. And that's really an agreement we have with DOT, and we've been monitoring that. And, I'm happy to, certainly share the data with you as to how many cars every day, what times a day, and things like that.
What's interesting, I'm less worried about the cars than the bikes, because cyclists, and I understand as a cyclist too, don't want to stop.
Yeah.
And when you have a fairly continuous line and lots of people trying to cross it, it gets tricky.
I know our security guys try to slow people down. I think some of the bikers just, they do what they do. Yes.
All right, thanks. Any other questions? Okay, this is just for the record, Commissioner Lutfi.
So just with the lighting again, and maybe I misunderstood this. With the installation of these lights, what happens to the existing, more like historic city light structures? Do they disappear?
The green pole, it does disappear.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then did you say, does this need DOT approval, or have you already been in?
Yeah, it did. DOT approval for the uplands in the DMAP streets was required. Our obligation is to maintain the poles and to feed the poles with electric, right? So they're not fed like every normal pole on the street in New York.
So you already have DOT.
So I have DOT approval. They also wanted to check the light levels. They looked at the model that L'Observatoire put together, and they've signed off on that model.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, yes, Commissioner Waldman-Smith.
I have a question related to the lighting on sheet 30. I think it's 30. The rendering shows the chimneys of the historic buildings being uplit. Is that just?
That's not part of this proposal. It is something we'd like to do. It's something that it's complicated with EDC, but it is something we'd like to do, and we're actually beginning conversations with EDC about that.
Just a quick
Commissioner
one
Chen.
about lighting. Since you mentioned the Seaport, which is obviously quite heavy industrial, in use of materials.
Mhm.
Your proposed lighting seems to be actually, in the opposite direction. And also, in terms of sense of safety, the issue of the planters, I wonder if you also have any issue with the skateboarders with these long linear surfaces, whether that's an issue for you. So there are two parts to the question. Number one is
The lighting palette of the finishes is still like this matte black stone that is currently being used for the bollards. So it's kind of, we're trying to tie that into the lighting palette on the finishes, and the brass tip is something that we were introducing to as a palette, as a new palette to the product.
And then, I'm sorry, your second question was.
about the skateboard.
With the existing area in Pier 17 on the stairs, on the railings, and we are using deterrents,
Okay.
Skateboard deterrents on those.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, let's move to public testimony. And I don't have any sign-in sheets, but I'll just ask, is there anyone in the room who would like to testify on this item? Okay, please come forward to the mic and state your name for the record, and you have 3 minutes to speak.
Good afternoon. My name is Marie Oleski, and I thank you for this opportunity to testify on behalf of Save Our Seaport. The South Street Seaport is a designated historic district in the city of New York, formed and defended by citizen engagement. We are here to urge and implore that the Landmarks Preservation Commission honor its mandate to protect the historic district from yet another intrusion on the part of the developer. The name, the Seaport, is how the developer here seeks once again to define the historic district and all of its signage. The Seaport may be the developer's retail and entertainment complex, but it is not the South Street Seaport. It is not this neighborhood, and this blatant rebranding, intentional rebranding of the South Street Seaport Historic District should not be permitted. The wayfinding signage, with 2 exceptions, directs the public to the developer's commercial enterprises and tenants, not to what makes this part of the city distinct and treasured. As an example, one will find directions to Pier 17, but not to Pier 16, to commercial and retail space, to drinking and dining, but no maritime. No mention or direction to the storied, historic, landmarked ships in the hallowed harbor. The Wavertree, Ambrose Lightship, Tugboat Decker, Schooners Pioneer, and Howard Letty. Near forgotten is what started this all. The historic district was here way before Howard Hughes. Now, all commercial, no cultural. The proposed lighting appears in number to be excessive and would light its portion of the South Street Seaport like a theme park. The quality of the light has not been specified, and this is crucially important. The design of the fixtures themselves is disappointing given the precedents provided. But ultimately, it's the signage. This is not any old seaport. It is designated as an historic seaport. This is not Woodbury Commons or Paramus Shopping Mall. This is New York City's Maritime Historic District. painstakingly created and taxpayer funded, that can only be preserved through citizen action and the diligence of the New York City Landmarks Commission. Our commission.
I'm terribly sorry. You have the 3 minutes. If you could please sum up your testimony.
Gladly. Please keep the historic character of this district foremost, and let's remember who we are, where we came from, and what we stand for. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony.
Yeah. And is there anyone else in the room who wishes to speak? Okay, so not seeing any other hands raised, I'm going to turn it over to Gregory to see if we have remote participants.
Thank you, Chair Carroll. We have a few hands raised in our attendees list. So first be hearing from John Graham from the Victorian Society in New York. So John Graham, I will be promoting you to panelist right now. And if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. John Graham for the Victorian Society of New York. First thing we noticed about this proposal is that the presentation includes but a single historic view of the Seaport, a tightly cropped photo from the 1880s. We also noticed that all the design precedents come from other parts of the city or from catalogs. And as we feared, a streetscape design that isn't closely based on historic conditions within this unique district is unsuccessful. When the Landmarks Commission first reviewed the reconstruction of the Seaport's public spaces by the Rouse Corporation in the early 1980s, it carefully studied historic images of the district. It insisted on materials and designs that mimicked historic conditions or were closely based upon them. It also required that public streets remain visually and functionally public, even though they were being rebuilt by a private entity. The festival marketplace had to work within these constraints. Whatever marketing problems the Seaport has had over the years, they haven't been caused by an overabundance of historic authenticity. Much of the proposed work is simply inappropriate, including too much concrete in the form of planters, seating, and paving. There should be no exposed concrete. Too many planters. Too many tables. The privatized restaurant seating on Fulton Street, which has been there for years, needs to be addressed. Outdoor dining should respect the layout of public spaces and not interfere with larger historic design objectives. Too many trees. This unique district is almost all we have left of New York's historic commercial waterfront. We support tree planting as an environmental good, but there are some places where trees don't belong. Here they will have no meaningful effect on larger climate issues and an insignificant effect even on local conditions, but a big negative effect on historic character. Historically, industrial districts did not have trees. The embedded pavement signs are superfluous and distracting. Too many lampposts, and they don't look anything like historic Seaport lighting. Types of posts to be replaced. The two types of posts to be replaced were based on historic utilitarian arc lights in this neighborhood and on earlier ornamental gas lights that remained alongside. The proposed lights are too far removed from the precedents that supposedly inform them. Too many wayfinding signs. In fact, there's too much of everything. In materiality, design, and quantity, the changes will minimize and overwhelm rather than contribute to the historic character of the South Street Seaport Historic District. We understand that after 40 years, some updating is necessary, but the goal should be public spaces that better reflect and enhance the historic character of the district rather than move it in the opposite direction. Thank you, Commissioners.
Okay, thank you so much for your testimony. Next up, we'll be hearing from Lucy Levine from the Historic Districts Council. So Lucy Levine, I'm going to promote you to panelist right now. And if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak. Thank you.
Hi, Commissioners. My name is Lucy Levine. I'm speaking on behalf of the Historic Districts Council. HGC takes public space and public amenities very seriously because they are necessary for a thriving city. Without them, the city is crueler, flatter, lonelier, and more bereft. Therefore, HGC is chagrined to see this proposal showing landscaping, lighting, and signage that could be proposed for any area of the city without any specific or meaningful relationship to the seaport. No wonder there are so many proposed signs that say Seaport in this presentation. With these generic proposed design elements, it's hard to know where you are. We asked the applicant to do better by the public and believe that street furniture and lighting proposed for the South Street Seaport should follow historic precedents. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony. So I initially saw Linda Roche with her hand raised. Linda Roche, if you are still with us, please click the raise hand button so I know you would like to. There you go. So Linda Roche, I'm going to promote you to panelist right now. And if you could please state your name for the record and unmute your line, you'll have 3 minutes to speak. Thank you. Hello, Linda Roche, are you with us? I am requesting that you unmute now.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you for the opportunity to testify today against the Howard Hughes design.
Linda, you're breaking up. Could you possibly get to a place with a little bit better connection?
Is this better?
Hello?
Is this better?
Yes, this is better. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so thank you for the opportunity to testify today against the Howard Hughes Experience design. I moved to the Seaport area in 1978 when the Seaport was the historic South Street Seaport, and people from around the world came to visit and get a glimpse of the old world Seaport. Little by little, that has been eviscerated by Howard Hughes. My comments are, this is a historic area where the words historic have been removed from all that pertains to the Seaport. Howard Hughes removed historic and rebranded it the Seaport District. The signs they imagine are ordinary and welcome to the neighborhood. No, it's the historic Seaport neighborhood.
Linda, I'm terribly sorry. You're breaking up again.
Oh, sorry. Well, you got the gist, and I do agree with most of the other people who have already testified. So thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for your testimony. Okay, I'm looking through the attendees list now. If you would like to testify, please raise your hand so I could see you. Okay, I do not see any further hands raised. So I will, I see Victoria. She has her hand raised. So Victoria, I am promoting you to panelist right now. So if you could please state your name for the record and unmute your line, you'll have 3 minutes to speak. Thank you.
Hello?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for allowing me to speak. I would just like to say that we are all very concerned over the approval for a luxury skyscraper in the South Street Seaport Historic District, and the notion that Howard Hughes is privatizing our historic districts right before our eyes. The very fact is that this project failed to comport with the landmark laws. No thought has been given to the surrounding landmarks that will be put at risk. This is so wrong on so many levels. I would just like to say that we do not support the Landmark Preservation Commission to continue this horror show on any level. Howard Hughes did not buy the historic district. He has no right to be putting lights and deciding what the landscaping will be. We don't want him there. He should not be building a skyscraper in the historic district. And I would just like to say for all of our neighbors in Soho, in Tribeca, and the Seaport, that this is not the Landmark Preservation Commission's mission. And we are extremely offended that you bent the laws and stood the laws on their ear to accommodate this billionaire that wants to turn it into another meatpacking district. We don't want our residential neighborhoods altered to commercial. These buildings are very important to us, and we are very disappointed with Sarah Carroll's leadership of the Landmark Preservation Commission. Howard Hughes should not be permitted to build this building, and we will not welcome them. They are not a welcome addition to the community. And quite frankly, we are horrified that LPC has colluded to allow Howard Hughes to help himself to our historic districts. That's all I can say. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much for your testimony. I do not see any further hands raised in our attendees list. So I will note for the record that Manhattan Community Board 1 recommends denial, stating that the committee is advocating for the creation of spaces that will eliminate the historic atmosphere that serves the needs and benefits this community first and foremost. These proposals suggest a vision that will rebrand the historic landscape of this area that is in conflict with the vision of the community in New York City. And we also received a letter from Downtown Alliance recommending approval. And with that, I will bring it back to you, Chair Carroll.
Okay, thank you very much. And I'd like to turn back to the applicant team and ask if you'd like to respond to any of the comments we've heard.
In terms of addressing some of the issues, I mean, we worked with the Seaport Museum on wayfinding and landscaping throughout. And so to the degree that no one's seen the directory content yet, but the directory content will direct people to more locations. I just point out, because the slide with wayfinding is up here. There are only 5 locations in the uplands where there's wayfinding. So we're not overly pushing. Most of the signage you see that refer to are private locations, if that's the comment, one of the comments that was made, is really on Pier 17. Again, this is in response to the 10 million visitors a year that the Seaport gets. And the feedback we get from those people. I mean, as you know, people are not afraid to voice their opinions these days. And the questions we are answering, trying to answer with this, proposal that we have. Again, in terms of the wayfinding signage, the sort of beauty of the design that Pentagram put forth is really that we can add, we could subtract, and that's why we're going for the master plan, is that we can move them pole to pole. We could, if there are other areas that the museum wishes to essentially put on these poles, we can add them. So, in terms of addressing the maritime piece of this and the private locations and things like that, I think, I tried to think that we did a pretty thoughtful job on that. Look, there's disagreement. We're trying to run we don't own a Seaport. Yes, we lease the Seaport. We've invested about $1 billion in the Seaport between everything we've done in the uplands and on the pier and the tin building. We care about it. I don't know that adding seating to the sidewalk is really necessarily defeating the historic purpose of the Seaport. In fact, a lot of the seating we have around in the uplands area allows people to enjoy those buildings that are there, those historic buildings that are there more. And that's really what we're aiming at, is to get people to stay longer here. I really, in terms of the branding of the Seaport, I can't really address it other than to say we have to call it something. The South Street Seaport is a bigger historic district. We are one element of that. So.
Thank you. And just one quick question. I assume this is obvious, but I just want to know for the record that as you propose the different seating and planters, I assume that the existing planters and seating would be removed and not be coexisting with the new. Okay. All right, commissioners, any final questions? All right, let's move to close the hearing. Commissioner Chen, would you make a motion to close the hearing? Thank you. And Commissioner Ginsburg, would you second? Second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, the hearing is closed and we'll begin our discussion on this master plan for signage, seating and planters and lighting. And in the interest of time, I'm going to just sort of kick it off with Vice Chair Bland, if you'd like to start this one.
Thank you. I'll keep my comments short. But I want to say that I was moved by much of the testimony, surprisingly so. It was a good reminder for me of the origins of this extraordinary little part of our city and how it has changed over the years. And I think our goal, I hope our commission, is to even as we adapt and change buildings and districts continually, that we don't let the history of this extraordinary place be lost. And I think that's what a lot of the testimony was about. And for one, it affected me. I'll just note a couple of things. I asked the question about the lighting earlier, because I was finding that these new lights all over the district were out of character with what happens in other districts, historic or not, within the city. And I just was wondering, do we have other parts of the city which have been branded, if you will, by new and custom-made lighting fixtures? And I think the answer basically is no. Maybe in some parks, et cetera, but mostly no. So that's a little bit of an issue. Although I don't object to the idea of increasing lighting, I'm not against that. But the lighting that's being proposed, I think, even by such a wonderful firm as yours, it to me is missing the mark. It's too big. The heads are too big. They're out of scale. I know that you were looking at other ways of adjusting it, but I think they're just too big. They're too alien, really, frankly. So I'll just leave it at that. I'll also note that as the former chair of the Brooklyn Botanic Garden, where my heart lies all the time, it's hard for me to speak against landscaping. But, this district never had any trees, never had anything that was growing probably. So to suburbanize it or modify it further with more and more stuff is a danger. I'm not sure what is the tipping point. I'm sure from the point of view of some of the testifiers, the tipping point was reached long ago. But nonetheless, I worry about that without being more specific about it. Both the plantings and the plethora of all of it. As one of the testifiers has said, there's just too much of everything. So I'll leave it at that. I mean, I don't think any element except the lighting design. I didn't specifically say that the wayfinding, the other aspects of what were presented, the seating elements rather clever. just maybe too much of it, although let's leave it at that. Maybe others will pick up.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Chan?
Yeah, part of the reason I share in some of Vice Chair's comment, because part of the reason why I was asking about the lighting design element, it seems compared to the other historic light fixtures, it seems, the applicant may want to take a look at a further study. This issue of trees and planting has been raised before. I remember the playground and the parks that was proposed, and I think the commission had a great deal of discussion among the members, and I think that's an issue we may want to take up again, taking a look at if we never had trees before, is it what does the commission want to do? And this is more of a question not on this case about given the safety is such a, because one of the goals of safety, and we experience in other neighborhood, is that the nighttime sense of security in terms of lighting. I wonder what the LPC has ever done, in terms of, we know that DOT will not allow any fixtures that's not in their standard catalog, whether it's the Cobra, whether it's the Bishop Crook. So, so I wonder whether the commission has ever done any lighting that is just this really truly belongs to that, reflective of that district and that period. Maybe that's something I see Mark shaking his head, but I'm curious.
The commission has approved, reinstallation of historic light poles in many places. So in that sense, I think but in terms of specific lighting for a specific district,
Right.
I think so.
I mean, I can think of the light poles at the New York Public Library, for example, but I can't think of any in an entire district. Maybe we might have approved some light fixtures in the Gansevoort Market Historic District, but that's something we could explore a little more. Commissioner Ginsburg.
And if I can just jump in for 1 second, Sarah, it's just also to remind the commissioners on this issue of trees and plantings. The commission did approve rules recently that does promote planting of new trees in every district as something that we recognize was an important resiliency and environmental goal, and that we didn't, the idea that somehow trees were inappropriate for any particular place was something that was sort of discussed and then sort of put aside. And the rules now allow staff to approve new trees, new tree pits, expanded tree pits, plantings and stuff like that in every district.
In every district, including historically industrial or commercial districts. These are a little different. They're in a planter, so I suppose it gets to the scale of the planter as well. And so that's a way we can think about some of the comments we hear. Commissioner Ginsburg.
So I understand we need good lighting, wayfinding is important. So, and the fact that you're doing a plan is good. I think there are certain things that may be missing or should be thought about, and agree with some of what the other commissioners said. I first went to South Street Seaport in 1966. It had grunge. I realize we can't really legislate grunge, and to some degree, it's really good the buildings have been cleaned up and restored and so on. But trying to make it a little less pristine. The other thing is Seaport. As somebody who sails, there is lots of things that are nautically inclined. Shade structures can be canvas. They can be suspended, there are things you can do. And so I would love to see within this just a little more variation, a little less cleanness, and a little more of a feeling without being cutesy, because that's where it often goes, of trying to be somewhat related to the fact that this was the maritime center of New York City historically, and whether it's some rigging or shade structures anyway. And I understand the concern about trees, but I would argue, given this is, people will laugh because I'm a broken record. With climate change, we're going to have hotter and hotter times, and creating shade, ideally with trees, because studies show where you have trees, it's about 8 degrees cooler, and that makes a big difference. So I'd live with the trees, but just, the wood shade structure, I realize your concern about umbrellas, but an umbrella feels more nautical to me than what you're showing. And so I'm hopefully being constructive, because I think the basic idea and what you're trying to do is really good. I would also just add, and it sounds like you'll do that, tying into things more of the non-commercial parts of the seaport so people can find their way to that too is important.
Thank you, Commissioner Heffernan-Smith.
Yeah, I agree with my fellow commissioners and a lot of what they've said already. I do kind of chagrin the loss of the sort of grungy original feeling of the Seaport. I didn't get there quite as early as 66, but maybe late 70s. I actually think that the granite benches that are there currently are more appropriate than what they're proposing. I think it's all very slick and designed, and I think that's at odds with this district. So, and I agree with Fred's comment about the light poles being sort of out of character. So I think, a master plan is great, but maybe a little more ad hoc master plan would be better for this district.
Thank you, Commissioner Jefferson.
Oh, this is an interesting design approach. You start off by saying, I'm going to develop a language, which all schools do. But this particular language that was developed was a safe language. It was a language that didn't really respond to what that place is, was, should be, could be. It did not respond to that. So they have to go back and look at the language, the granite base, the wood pieces. Those seem to be everywhere. They're not specific enough. They didn't think deep enough about that place. The other issue for me is the kind of the lighting. I thought it was very picturesque, scenographic, but beautiful. I mean, it's beautiful, beautiful lighting. But the poles I can see, if you want to change them to another pole, but the atmosphere created by the lighting I thought was beautiful and people. The plaques, the same thing with the language. It try to dig deeper to what that place is, get the essence of it, and then develop a language from that would make this place another special place. That's my comment.
Okay, thank you very much, Commissioner Master.
I agree with a lot of what the other commissioners said. I think that the lighting, we have to go back and do a little bit more work. If anything, I think the lighting fixture as designed is a little distracting from everything else. The other thing I want to address is I think that shade that they have, my understanding from what I heard was that the material that they were using for the umbrella was rope. Is that correct? So that does evoke, you were talking about canvas, but they're talking about wind. So that was an element that they brought in that I don't think was that clear in the picture. So I do applaud them for using that materiality. The one thing that hasn't been mentioned so far that I found a little jarring was actually the embedded street paving signage. I thought that was, I don't want to say intrusive, but I thought it was a little bit much. I think that the signage that we kept on the poles was more appropriate than the embedded signage. Those are my comments.
Okay, thank you very much, Commissioner Lutfi.
I think I actually think this is very difficult. And I appreciate the presentations and I appreciate the goals. I also appreciate the comments from members of the community. I think there's a natural tension here between, that is, makes this whole thing very difficult. And that is, as the applicant stated, and as we know, the South Street Seaport Historic District is much bigger than this area. And I think what's going on here and what we all have to be very thoughtful about is the fact that this effort is about defining a small area of the South Street Seaport. And in doing that, in the minds of the people who visit, they see this as the South Street Seaport. And the seaport is just like a term that we all use for the South Street Seaport. And so that actually that reinforces the fact, the problem, because now this much smaller area is being, and I don't even want to use the word branded because I think it's a real problem, but it's being branded as the South Street Seaport, and it's not. So I actually think the whole concept of this is not right. I'm sorry to say. I think your intentions are positive. I'm going to speak about this in the greater good, but I think that what has to happen here is that if there needs to be better signage and better lighting, it has to be for the entire district. It cannot be for the 4 blocks or 5 blocks that are the focus of where, Howard Hughes's, properties are. It doesn't make sense. Look, I think Pier 17 is amazing. Look, played a role in it. I think the Tin Building is fantastic. By the way, people do know how to get there because people want to go to these places. They want to go in the winter to ice skate. They want to go. They want to go see the boats. But I really think what has to happen is that if we need to help people navigate around the South Street Seaport Historic District, then we need better signage and lighting for the whole thing. And I do not believe that the retail elements should be part of that. You don't see signs for Saks Fifth Avenue, Bergdorf Goodman. When you're if I'm going to a Jean-Georges restaurant, I know where it is. And if I don't know where it is, I look it up on Google. And so I'm just feeling uncomfortable with the whole thing. And I honestly think that unless it's rethought from a much bigger perspective and with the historic district in mind, and then that it would include like appropriate lighting for the entire district and not so it's almost not even worth it to talk about the excessive amount. This is like, as people have said, defining this as like a narrow retail mall. It's almost not worth talking about it because I don't think it makes sense, period, the whole thing. So I would say if you want to benefit from a broader wayfinding system and lighting system, you really have to think big. And, you can enlist some of the other, including the community, some of the other major players in the area in how to do that.
That's it. Okay, thank you. All right, so I think we've had very thoughtful comments today. We're not going to take an action. We'll ask you to think about the comments, and I think that they, really speak to thinking about the essence of the place, sort of the grunginess, some of the nautical characters, some of those things that might be missing in the scheme, thinking about the number of fixtures, the size, and their relationship to the larger historic district. And we'll have you think about it and have you back when you're ready. Okay, thank you. All right, we'll move to the next item now.
The next item is public hearing item number 9, LPC 24-01361. This is an application for a certificate of appropriateness in the Borough of Manhattan, Block 499, Lot 7, 104 to 110 Greene Street in the Soho Cast Iron Historic District. This is a store and office building with classical details designed by William Dilthey, built in 1908. The application is to replace ground floor infill and install interior partitions.
Just. Ready? Yeah. Good afternoon, Chair Carroll, members of the Landmark Preservation Commission. My name is Brian Kritzman. This is my colleague, Ahmed El Karimi, and we are with TPG Architecture. We're also accompanied by Meenakshi Srivasan from Kramer 11. And we are here today to represent our client, Balenciaga, and their proposed alterations to the ground floor of 110 Greene Street, which is located in the Soho Cast Iron District. Currently, the ground floor of the building is divided into 3 spaces: the building lobby entrance to the northern bay and 2 retail spaces to the south. Balenciaga will be occupying 2 ground floor retail spaces, which have been vacant for some time. And with that said, I will turn it over to Ahmed, who will talk you through our proposal.
Hello, everyone. Our proposal involves the alteration to the ground floor to accommodate Balenciaga at this location. It includes a subtle alteration to the doors and window infills in order to create a unified design. The alterations affect 3 existing key elements of the facade, which is replacing the existing display windows with a single pane glazing, replacing the central doors, meanwhile converting the side door into a display vitrine and removing the 2 non-historic display boxes that are adjacent to that door. The alterations will not remove any historic fabric. Rather, it will replace non-historic storefront infills with a simple urban design that will be respectful of the building's history and architectural features, and is consistent with the storefronts and streetscape of the Soho Cast Iron District. We will further delve into the changes as we progress into our presentation. One Greene Street is located between Houston and Canal. Per the LPC designation report, Greene Street is a vibrant area known for its distinct character and appeal to street shoppers. The street features short blocks that make it easy for pedestrians to explore and discover its many offerings, from creative storefront designs to unique presentations. Greene Street provides an engaging and dynamic experience for those seeking a one-of-a-kind shopping experience. The building was designed by William J. Dilthey and was constructed in 1908 and within the Soho Cast Iron District. While it has not been ascribed any LPC it has not been ascribed a style within that LPC designation report. It is a contributing building within the historic district. In our research, we discovered a collection of historic photos dating back to the 1940s through the 1970s. The photos provide a valuable insight into the evolution of the building facade in those specific areas we plan to affect. The building is a through-line building where the primary facade and storefront is actually located on Mercer Street. Meanwhile, the Greene Street side is historically the secondary facade utilized mainly for commercial use. The history reflects the ground floor and how it has adapted into a storefront, which has been existing for over 20 years now, and it has been a part of the retail environment and the streetscape of the historic district.
The existing display window has undergone significant changes over time. This display window transitioned from an operable single pane window, which you can see on the 40 somewhat swiveling, to a partially louvered ventilated grill that exhausted mechanical with side-by-side glazing. And since then, the bulkhead has been lowered, and currently it has a glazing system with a transom above. In the 40s through the 70s, we can see on the image on the left how the existing entry doors were previously elevated from the sidewalk and included a solid sill above the doors. This condition is no longer there, and currently resides an entry egress door really to the retail space. As for the existing transparent entry doors with display boxes on each side, we can see that on the image on the right, on the left, originally in the 40s and the 70s, the existing doors were located mainly on the right side. It was an opaque wood door. And on this, since the buildings evolved, although the egress stair was removed, the door leading to grade remained, and presently is a set of transparent entry doors, which is no longer what we need in that location. So a few close-ups here, you could see the swivel window and how it transitioned into a fixed window, and then it transitioned into a fixed louver with side-by-side windows. Here we see our direct adjacent neighboring buildings where we see a combination of display windows mixed with transoms, similarly to what we are proposing. Locations such as 42 and 77 Greene Street, as well as 133 Woosh, I'm sorry, I skipped. I'm so sorry. Locations such as 121 and 136 Greene Street features a combination of transoms above the door and utilizing a single pane window. Locations such as 130 and 134 Greene Street shows a combination of soffits near with display windows. Here we have 127/130 Greene Street. This also shows a combination of soffits near the window displays. On this slide, we show 42 and 77 Greene Street, where we show a combination of display windows that were converted into display vitrines. And then lastly, we have 129 and 131 Greene Street, where we see how doors leading to grade have been converted to display vitrines as well. So commissioners, here we could see the ground floor as it stands today, where we have the lobby entry doors on the northern bay and the two retail adjacent spaces, which we plan to redemise. Now on the plan on the left, we can see how the ground floor condition transitions to from the lobby entry doors on the northern bay, but now along with a unified retail space along the ground floor. Now on this slide, you could see what we're planning on removing. So we're definitely removing all the the display windows, the entry door in the center, and then the side entry door along with the display boxes. So here you could see the outcome. So we plan on taking out the mullion at the transom, where the soffit beyond complements the mullion effect. You can see the display vitrine on the side with the removed side-by-side boxes. And these are the replaced infills, just for dimensional context. Now, to summarize our intended scope of work, on the interior, the ground floor will be redemised to combine the two retail spaces. We plan to replace the entry doors, meanwhile maintaining the transom above those doors. Actually, let's go back here. Along with the storefront update, we have the soffit that will be set back more than 18 inches that recalls the transom effect. It also houses an internal security gate that will be on the interior side, as well as it conceals some ceiling treatment that we have on the interior. Here we have just the typical mullion update. We are planning on replacing the storefronts and the windows with ultra clear glass, which will delve into the finishes down. The storefront is new and will be equipped, as I mentioned earlier, just ultra clear glass. And the same thing, just as the door, we plan on having the existing, the soffit offset at 18 inches along that window as well, also giving us an area for recessed signage. It's just some dimensionals for context. So you can see the security gate and how it's on the inside, and also the signage set back about 18 inches from the store. Lastly, we are also proposing to remove the side entry door along with the removal of the display boxes on each side of the door. At the proposed display vitrine, we have provided a footplate that complements both entry doors, the one for Balenciaga and also the lobby entry doors. Now, because the door has been converted to a display vitrine, we don't see the need for the display boxes on the exterior. So we brought back the integrity of the brick by just exposing it and cleaning it. Just a few elements here just to take point. The existing door that will be removed is going to, the new vitrine window remains in its position so that it does not affect the actual footprint of the building where future tenants can come in down the line and put it back. Allow me to highlight some key elements of the proposed treatment and finishes. Firstly, we plan to enhance the storefront windows and equipping them with new ultra clear insulated glass. We do have some samples here. I'm going to pass them around if you guys want to take them. Next, the setback soffit will be finished in weathered concrete, adding a touch of sophistication from the interior along the exterior. And that's the soffit that will be housing that internal security gate as well. Now, to maintain a harmonious relationship with the existing building and the storefront mullions will be finished in a dark powder-coated metal gray. This choice of finish will complement the upper windows, which will pan back to the main elevations, but we try to match as much as possible the upper windows. Furthermore, the setback soffit will serve as a complementary surface for the recessed placement of backlit milk white acrylic letters. This design choice will allow Balenciaga to maintain all signage within the interior, maintaining the existing brick facade's integrity. In conclusion, these proposed changes aim to elevate Balenciaga's storefront. We believe that through these discrete alterations, the storefront will become a true masterpiece that reflects the essence of Balenciaga, but meanwhile provides a unified design and maintains the building's architectural features. And with that, we're happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much.
Sorry for jumping on your-
No worries. Any questions, commissioners? I don't see any questions. We'll see if there's any public testimony. Is there anyone in the room who wishes to speak on this item? All right, not seeing anyone in the room, I'll turn it over to Gregory Kalla to take us through any remote participants.
Thank you, Chair Carroll. We did not receive any signups beforehand for this item. If you would like to speak on it, please click the raise hand button at the bottom of your Zoom screen now. Okay, I do not see any hands raised, so I will just note for the record that Manhattan Community Board 2 recommends approval, and I will bring it back to you, Chair Carroll.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, so if there are no final questions, I think we can probably move to our discussion. Thank you for a clear presentation. All right, let's make a motion to close the hearing. Commissioner Chen, would you make a motion to close the hearing? Thank you. And Commissioner Ginsburg, would you second that motion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, the hearing's closed and we'll begin our discussion. And as was presented, this is a through block building and this facade did not historically feature storefronts, but it now has openings created for storefronts and modern storefront infill. And so the proposal is to replace the modern storefront infill with new display windows and doors, and those would have integral roll down security gates and that are concealed and interior signage that's set back 18 inches. So we'll begin our discussion. Commissioner Master, would you like to start this one?
Sure. I find these proposals pretty reasonable. One, replacing the display windows. I think they're going to replace it with a full height single pane window. And I believe that's pretty typical for this historic district and other retail stores. very reasonable. They could, for them to take out the mullion. Secondly, they're going to replace the entry door. I think they're going to change it from the silver to something more of a sleek black look. And again, they're not doing anything to the masonry, so that's reasonable. And then the third, they're going to convert the door to a window. But again, they're keeping the masonry and it's also reversible. So I think that these are very reasonable changes and I find it appropriate.
Thank you, Commissioner Lutfi.
I think you summed it up very nicely, and I think it's really well done. Very, in its own way understated. The fact, everything about it, the signage being set back, the fact that it's reversible, making sure you're keeping that opening there. I think it's terrific. I can approve it.
Thank you, Commissioner Chen.
I agree with the comments.
Commissioner Ginsburg.
I agree, appropriate.
Okay, Commissioner Jefferson. Okay, thank you. So I think we're all in agreement. Commissioner Master, would you read the motion?
Sure.
Thank you.
In the matter of LPC 24-01361, 104-110 Greene Street, Soho Cast Iron Historic District, the application is to replace ground floor infill and install interior partitions. I note that the building style, scale, materials, and details are among the features that contribute to the special architectural and historic character of the Soho Cast Iron Historic District. I also note that the building's fronts on both Greene Street and Mercer Street and the Greene Street facade did not historically feature storefronts. I recommend approval, finding that the removal of the existing modern storefront infill will not eliminate any significant architectural features, and the removal of the existing display boxes at the brick piers flanking the southernmost bay will eliminate a later installation that conceals the rusticated masonry. That the large single light fixed display windows will recall the configuration of the historic pivot windows and other tall single light display windows found at storefronts throughout the district. That the interior drop soffits featuring a faux exposed concrete finish and internally illuminated signage will be set back from the display window, will conceal housing for interior security grills, and will recall the proportions of a transom. That the tall paired doors below a single light transom with simple framing and details is a contemporary interpretation of the storefront entrances typically found at a building of this style and age. That the dark gray powder coated finish of the storefront infill will help to unite the ground floor with the windows throughout the rest of the facade. And that the southernmost bay appeared to serve as a loading or egress bay in historic photographs, and the conversion of this bay from doors to a display window with an enclosed interior vitrine will not eliminate a historic primary entrance or diminish the symmetry of the facade, given that the masonry surround will be maintained. And that the work will not detract from the special architectural and historic character of the building or the Soho Cast Iron Historic District.
Thank you. And Commissioner Lutfi, would you second that motion?
Second.
All right. And Mark, will you call the vote?
Chair Carroll,
Aye.
Commissioner Chen, Commissioner Ginsburg,
Aye.
Commissioner Jefferson,
Aye.
Commissioner Lutfi,
Aye.
Commissioner Carroll, Chair Carroll. Did I say you already?
Yes, you
Okay,
did.
6. There's a vote of 6.
Oh, me.
Oh, sorry. Commissioner Master,
Aye.
with a vote of 6 in favor, none opposed, the motion passes.
And that's approved. Thank you. Good luck. We'll move to the next item.
All right, we'll now move to public hearing item number 10. LPC 22-00874, an application for certificate of appropriateness in the Borough of Manhattan, block 528, lot 82. 51 Downing Street, aka 49 to 51 Downing Street in the Greenwich Village Historic District Extension 2. This is a Romanesque revival style stable and residence designed by Werner and Windhoff and built in 1896, with major alterations completed in 1986 to 88. The application is to construct a rooftop addition, replace ground floor infill, replace windows, and alter the rear facade.
Members of the commission, for giving us this opportunity. The property is located mid-block on Downing on the north side between Berwick and Bedford. The original architect, Warner and Windolf, completed the project in 1896. Just quickly, and you already know this, it was part of the extended Greenwich Village Historic District in 2010. So kind of the tail end of that red section. The project was originally designed to be a horse stable and a single family residence. In the late 80s, it went through a major renovations to make it a multi-family project. What you'll see kind of the differences in these three photos, the left being the historic text photo, the center being 1980s, and then the third being taken in 2010, but representative of what's there now. In the 80s, we lost the iron basket balcony of the second floor. That's when they changed the pedestrian entries and the garage entry. Presumably, they also removed the divided lights, and they are currently single light tilt and turn windows. In the 2010s, which again represents today's condition, the basket balcony of the fourth floor is also missing, but the entries for the most part are the same as they were in the 1980s, with some additions of intercoms and lighting. What we're looking to do, and it's important to note, so I represent my client, David Blumenfeld. He owns the fourth floor apartment and the current rooftop addition. His entrance is on the left side, which is 51 Downing. The other tenants, the other owners are on the right side, which is 49 Downing. I guess I could be using my cursor, tech savvy here. And then the center garage is part of my client's scope. So for the front facade, we are not looking to alter any of the historic material whatsoever. What we're looking to do is replace the 1980s interventions with what we believe to be more historically appropriate. So on the left is the existing condition, on the right proposed. On the left, what you see again are the two residential entry doors, the center garage. And then there is currently a rooftop addition. The rooftop addition does not span party wall to party wall. Unfortunately, it comes and bears on the roof itself. We're working with Silman engineers because what's happened is because they just are bearing on that kind of 2/3 point of the roof, it's caused severe deflection, which has caused ponding and leaking. And then also it's putting stresses on the original wood framing, the beam post and beams inside. So what Silman proposed was we really need to kind of carry the loads party wall to party wall and therefore kind of take the gable and regularize it. The other change is this is an existing bulkhead that abuts right behind the cornice, and that's something that we'd be looking to remove. And so ultimately, while the mass is very different than the original, the square footage is actually the same. We're not doing a bulk enlargement for square footage purposes. What the gable represents is it was a loft condition with a series of stepped mezzanines. But I'll go into all of these in more detail. Leanne tells me to keep within 15 minutes. So the materiality, the ground floor will be the wood to kind of harken back to the larger kind of solid and more monumental stable doors. The upper portions are a light metal. We have a combination of solid metal panels, brushed aluminum louvers. The stucco, the bulkhead, if you can see on the left side, is a mechanical bulkhead. The bulkhead you see on the right side is FDNY access. Currently, there are a lot of non-compliances with the original addition, which actually didn't comply with what DOB had on records. So what we're having to do as part of this is bring a lot of those up to current life safety systems. And part of that is the FDNY access to the roof. The rear facade, we don't have any historic photos, so we can't say for certain what is and is not historic, but I think most of it's fairly plain. The first three floors have brick masonry on either side here that appear to be original. Once we got to the fourth floor, there are actually lots of different infill conditions.
So there's a patchwork of CMU, stuccoed brick, at times wood framing. So much of the fourth floor masonry is not original. What also is not original, obviously, is everything kind of within between the two pillars of brick. We've got a combination of metal railings and benches, infilled windows, wood cladding, stucco, metal cladding, asphalt roofing. It runs the gamut. Comparison of the rear facade and the proposed facade. So what's to note is that the flue appears to be original. And so what we want to do is maintain the datum of where the masonry was originally. But because much of this is infilled and none of this is original, what we're looking to do is do more of a perforated brick, keep the brick, continue kind of a similar pattern, similar size brick, and then the same light color. But we want to bring in natural light and air to the bedrooms behind. And then the bulkhead, the rooftop addition again is a 2-story, same kind of transformed square footage going party wall to party wall. What you see here is this is actually the FDNY required ladder up to the lower roof to the upper roof. These are the metal louvers. The roof level is actually here. So right now the louvers are proposed to be acting as the railing itself. And then this is the FDNY stair bulkhead and the mechanical bulkhead. That's set back 6 feet from the edge of the roof. Materiality similar to the front, what was described as the addition for the front facade, the only difference being the perforated brick. And in terms of, again, the entry, what we're trying to do is establish the datum originally. So the solid fixed panel and then an operable passenger pedestrian door. What we'd like to do, each of the entrances has either a mechanical unit or FDNY standpipe. So for the mechanical units, we'd be looking to not have the full expression of the vent here, but to perforate the wood so we can kind of minimize the presence. Here are more detailed drawings. So again, the left is the existing. The transom lights are something the residences want to have that natural light coming in, but we'd be bringing that back up to the original kind of historic datum. And again, all of this being solid. We will have intercoms and lights. We'd be looking actually to have the lights attached to the transom. We can provide further specifications on that. Here are the garage door. Again, with the historic tax photo, you can see that the original garage door was flat paneled wood going up to the underside where they originally had the basket balcony. So we'd be doing the same here. This is the existing with the roll up metal door, which is in more detail in the drawings. So taking away what is non-original paneling, windows, more paneling, and the metal door, and making it the 2 bifold solid flat panel wood doors and matching fixed panels. And for the 4th floor windows, the original historic tax photo shows a 2/2. What we're hoping to do is I'll still have divided light, but understanding it's not a 2/2 configuration because the operation would be casement, but we were looking to increase the thermal performance by having a different operation, but still bring back the multi-lights as opposed to the single lights that are there now. And the drawings for such. And for the addition, so these top photos show the existing. On the left, that's that original piece of the bulkhead. That's the only piece visible from Downing Street currently. The infill, we don't know when that happened because it's actually not on the DOB drawings. And then this is the gable that currently is wreaking the havoc of the structure and the roof. And then this is what the facade looks like. These are rooftop additions around. These are pre-designations, so they don't represent what you all approved. Don't worry. Just quickly showing some of the other precedent. So it's not uncommon that the rooftop additions are visible from the main facades, from the main streets above the historic facades. As well, just some of the garage
very typical of the area. And it's a great variety between kind of pre-designation designs to ones that were viewed by landmarks. So I think the section probably shows it most clearly. So to the left is Downing Street, to the right is the rear facade. So what you can see here again is that the sight lines furthest across Downing will only slightly above the cornice show that existing bulkhead, but that even the existing addition is not visible. You will see from the mock-up photos that both the existing addition and the proposed addition are visible from gaps from Varick and 7th Avenue. And then this is the proposed. So again, kind of similar in relationship. There's no change in the level of the roof. We are having to redo the roof just given its current conditions, but there's no change in the level of the roof. Because we removed the bulkhead, nothing of the proposed addition is visible from Downing. So these are the mock-up views. And so from Downing, we identified that the existing addition is visible, but again, it's just the bulkhead in front. Nothing of the proposed addition is visible. And then you'll start to see glimpses tracking around from Varick, 7th Avenue, Carmine, and Bedford. And we'll go through each of those. So here from, and I'm gonna look from here since I can't read that. So from view one is the corner of Bedford and Downing. The only thing visible is the existing rooftop bulkhead. Nothing of the proposed is visible. View three is behind from Carmine Street. So you see the existing rooftop gable addition, and then obviously when we regularize it and bring it to the load-bearing walls, then it's going to have a greater visibility. What you can't see though is kind of the existing building below that point. And the reason we zoomed in is there's a restaurant, a temporary, well, I don't know if they're temporary anymore, but a restaurant that we couldn't get in front of. But what we're showing in all of these situations, we're showing the existing, the proposed with a rendering, the view of the mock-up, and when the mock-up isn't visible because we had to use flags, we marked what those flags were dictating, and what you see here is it's dictating top of bulkhead, top of roof. And for view four is across 7th Avenue, looking across the corner of Carmine Street to the back. And so with this gap, you see the gable of the existing, and then you see the proposed. For both of these, you do see a bit of the 4th floor brick of the rear facade. And again, all of these are kind of tied back to the datums for the mock-up. View five is almost directly behind on Carmine Street. So what you see here is you basically see the railing height and the FDNY stair bulkhead. View six is the far corner of Bedford and Carmine. For the most part, you're seeing here is the FDNY ladder of that, what would that be, north to west corner. View 8, there's a fleeting glimpse between the buildings here. And then view 7 and 9, we had identified them in the walkthrough with landmarks, but it turned out that there was nothing visible, but we kept those kind of marked for posterity. And then 10 is the extension of the neighbor's flue, which you see here. This kind of single point, and here's the mock-up with the flag. That's the highest most point of the neighbor's flue, but not anything of the addition. And so just as a cap, here's the proposed front and rear facades. I know I went through it quickly.
All right, thank you very much. Commissioners, do we have any questions? Yes, Commissioner Jefferson.
Your new roof addition, is it 5 feet higher than the existing? Am I correct in that?
The roof itself or the stair bulkheads? Oh, the bulkheads. The bulkheads are at 85 feet. And forgive me, let me go back to the sections or most
kind of illustrative of that. So we've got the upper bulkhead. It is, let's see. So the upper bulkhead is 85 feet. The roof is 75, and the bulkhead roof of the previous is 73.8. So if you compare roof to roof, it's about 1.5 feet different. But where ours is much higher is in the stair and mechanical bulkheads that we're flanking either side. It's about 10. The bulkhead is about 10 feet higher. The bulkhead's 10 feet higher than the 75 feet. We had to maintain the minimum clearance for the FD&Y up to the roof bulkhead. We're actually, that was a kind of a question posed by your staff, and we're looking to see if we can bring that down. We're just trying to find the minimum clearances for FD&Y.
Commissioner Ginsburg.
When you talk about the height of the existing roof, you're talking about the point of the existing
Exactly.
roof?
So I understand that's the high point. It's not the
high
midline.
point. Yeah, thank you.
Commissioner Lutfi.
So in the historic photos, I was just trying to make out what the original windows were. Were they 2/2s?
Yes. Yeah, double hung. Yes.
And was there any thought given to kind of restoring the look of the historic windows on the facade?
Well, we are proposing the divided lights that appear as 2/2. What the owner was preferring was the thermal performance of a casement and not the 2/2. I mean, I don't think it's off the table. They were just preferring the operation of the casement versus the double hung. So but they like the idea. What we want to do is get rid of the 80s interventions on the front facade and bring back some of that character.
But the windows that you're talking about are the ones on the upper floor, not the ones below.
Correct.
Okay, I just want to clarify that. Thank you.
It's owned by other owners, but I mean, the hope would be that there's precedent for them that gets changed. I know it's not a master plan proposal we're making.
Commissioner Ginsburg.
And those windows, the casement will have a true division in them?
I mean, right now, we were proposing just the applied, but they could be a true division. But we do want the IGUs. We do want the thermal performance.
Right, but they make IGUs.
Yeah, with a true divided light.
True divided, yeah.
I guess the question would be, and that's getting your guidance on, when you do the true divided light, then obviously the thickness of everything isn't real.
I should add, what you get is there is a spacer bar between the insulated glass and then the mullions on the inside and outside. So although you're not breaking the glass, it looks like a divided fully.
We'd be open to that. Yeah, we have no problem with that.
Simulated divided light with the spacer bar in between the glass. You have a grid on the inside and outside.
We don't want it to look like there's a snap-on. So what you're pointing out is that feeling that we're not breaking the thermal performance or the continuity of the glass, but it looks as if it's not a snap-on. Yeah.
Just thinking, since they were double hung windows originally.
Yes, I'll go back to
and
that's what we believe.
And you're trying to return the 2/2, and we have approved high performance windows that replicate the shift in the plane between the upper and lower sash, and then the lower sash operates as a casement.
So you create the offset, but the operation is the same.
It's still a casement, so that's
I wasn't aware
to think about.
No, I mean, I think the goals are aligned. We want to get the building, the front of this building, you know, it still has the horse's head. It still has so many of these incredible details, and we want to get it back to where it was before. And if the performance can be improved thermally, I think they'd be open to that.
Okay. Other questions?
Well, I just want to clarify the wood on the doors on the bottom is.
We're looking to do a walnut.
Okay.
We can't find anything that gives us any understanding of what the wood or even the tone was with the black and white photos. And we were looking at kind of other precedent around the area that seemed like a tone that was consistent.
Okay. Any other questions? let's see if we have any public testimony. Is there anyone in the room who wishes to speak? And so I'm going to turn it over to Gregory to see if we have remote participants.
Thank you, Chair Carroll. We received a few signups in advance for this item. So we'll first be hearing from Chloe Gregoire from the Village Preservation. So Chloe, I am promoting you to panelist right now. And if you could please state your name for the record and unmute your line, you'll have 3 minutes to speak. Thank you.
Good day, Commissioners. My name is Chloe Gregoire, and I'm speaking on behalf of Village Preservation. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. The proposed wood windows and panel doors of the primary facade appropriately reflect the changing use of the building over time, while referencing a material commonly found throughout the district. However, perhaps the design of the 2 front doors should include glazed panels consistent with the reference photos on page LPC 009, rather than the proposed solid wood. Beyond this, we feel that the proposed rooftop addition is absolutely too large and overwhelms the building, especially its monolithic presence as seen from the west along Carmine Street and 7th Avenue South. The overall massing of the proposed addition should be greatly reduced, and the placement and shape restudied in order to minimize the overwhelming impact of these views. The addition is completely out of scale with the building and its surroundings, and the proposal should match the height of the existing penthouse structure at the absolute maximum. The materiality should also be carefully considered, as the currently proposed swath of louvered metal is inappropriate to the district and inconsistent with nearby rooftop additions, which more typically utilize the glass, steel, and/or brickwork found at the studio windows and other similar rooftop structures. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for your testimony. Next up, we'll be hearing from John Graham from the Victorian Society in New York. So John Graham, I'm promoting you to panelist right now. And if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. John Graham for the Victorian Society in New York. We do not support the proposed changes to 51 Downing Street, which are inharmonious with the existing structure. While we're sympathetic to the changing uses and needs of the building, additions and extensions need to be sensitive to the existing structure and in some way reflect its existing style and history. The proposed rear addition in metal and glass doesn't show an aesthetic connection to the original 19th century structure. It's glaringly modern and incongruous with the brick and masonry building, and it's far too visible from various street level perspectives. Similarly, we feel the proposed doorway infill on the front doesn't look as though it's a part of a historic structure. While the existing infill isn't original or stylistically congruent, its replacement presents an opportunity to redesign with something that recalls the original use of the building, which was a stable. The proposed walnut doors are sleek and modern and lack the dimensionality of the cited neighborhood examples. We would encourage revisions of the design that fit better with the building's own history, as well as that of the neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony. And next up, we'll be hearing from Lucy Levine from the Historic Districts Council. So Lucy Levine, I'm promoting you to panelist right now. So if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak. Thank you.
Hi, Commissioners. My name is Lucy Levine. I'm speaking on behalf of the Historic Districts Council. HDC finds the proposed fenestration on the front facade compositionally inconsistent because the applicant seeks to replace the top row of windows with divided lights while leaving the existing single pane windows below. Further, we're concerned with the visibility of the rooftop addition. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much for your testimony. I am looking through our attendees list now, and I do not see any further hands raised. So I will note for the record that Manhattan Community Board 2 recommends approval of the garage door and the entrance doors together with their lighting. and denial of the rooftop addition as of a design that does great harm to the historic district and is unacceptably visible by the standard of minimal visibility for rooftop additions that has guided the commission with respect to this district. And with that, I'll bring it back to you, Chair Carroll.
Thank you very much. So I'd like to ask if you'd like to respond to any of the comments.
Got it. Well, I would love to hear what you all have to say with regards to the stable doors and such, because I'm unclear whether you're supposed to go back to the historic text photo or whether you're supposed to go back to a notion of what stable doors were at that time and look elsewhere for feedback. So, we were looking to what we thought was the most kind of historically applicable. With regards to the addition, we recognize it's visible, but the proposal is that it's not visible from Downing Street, that it's not visible from what we believe is the front facade and the only kind of identified historic fabric. In fact, we're trying to minimize the disruption of the addition that is there now. We're only looking to create a residence that utilizes the square footage that he had and was given. Currently, it's not compliant. Currently, it's doing great damage to the building itself. And so we have to utilize the knowledge of Silman to kind of bring it back to what is structurally possible. And so we're and again, recognizing that the sloped roof has one type of visibility and one type of height. And then when you regularize that, there's a different, we understand that the materiality is not mimicking that of the historic, but we also felt that there was that to add the weight of masonry on top of it is not only not possible, but we didn't think that kind of extending the fabric was doing justice to the existing building. So.
Okay. All right. And just maybe on the materiality and if we look at the back and you have all the louvers as well, and are those then for shade or?
I didn't really speak to the sustainability aspect of this. While obviously the owner would love to have views of natural daylight and minimize the artificial lighting, we also want to reduce the solar heat gain. So all of the louvers are to do that. And given that the energy codes have increased substantially over the last 5 years, what we're looking to do is kind of meet all of those thermal criteria. So all of this is about kind of providing that kind of high performance facade for the addition. And then recognizing too that we are only replacing the 4th floor, but the hope would be that with your guidance and what gets approved, the co-op board has been, understanding and in approval of what we're doing, because we're obviously helping and touching their entry to match whatever's approved for my client's entry.
Okay. Thank you. Any final questions, commissioners? Okay, let's move to close the hearing. Commissioner Jefferson, would you make a motion to close the hearing?
So moved.
Commissioner Master, would you second that motion?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, the hearing's closed and we'll begin our discussion. We have sort of 3 areas of work. We have the new doors, which are new walnut stained doors that will, that in their configuration recall the doors evident in the tax photo. The second component is the casement windows at the 3rd or the top floor that will have a grid to recall the historic 2/2 configuration. And finally, the rooftop addition and squaring it off and constructing it in glass with metal louvers and bulkheads on top of that. So we'll begin that discussion now. Commissioner Ginsburg, would you like to start this one?
Okay, so let me go through these. In general, the doors are fine. They may be a little too pristine. I also, instead of folding out, it may make sense to fold them up. That would be a look at, but in general, they're good. For the windows on the front, I think what Chair Carroll was saying, where you do an awning or a casement on top of it so you can get some of the depth, but you get the energy efficiency of that with the true divisions is fine. And now the big issue, which is the bulkhead. It's too big. And it may be the same square footage, but given that the peak of the existing bulkhead is probably a high ceiling, you should be able to do a roof with the same square footage in a much lower height. And so I would say go back to the drawing board and find something. I think the fact that it is different and of modern materials is fine and appropriate, but to some degree with the changes in the back, it doesn't differentiate it as enough from the back. I'd also mention in the back, there are these square windows that go up and that are on your floor. I think keeping those would be good to make more of a connection with the existing building, and then the brick screen is fine for the rest of it. I don't think you can, sorry, but the key issue is that bulkhead because it's just too big.
Thank you, Commissioner Jefferson.
The rooftop addition is a bit taller than the existing addition, and has a different. Well, this is notes for myself. Has a different geometric value. I think the roof addition is too tall and should be reduced. I think the ground floor infill. I think it's a replication and it's welcome and it's appropriate. Replace the windows, appropriate. The rear facade, all the existing fabric, the historic fabric has been removed. So there's no historic fabric left. So I just leave it as is, I guess. But my big concern was the height. And if you look at drawing LPC-024, you would see how it's an interesting issue where the existing one is an odd configuration, but it's quieter. It's louder. The newer one fits in better, but it's taller. So that's why I think it should be reduced some and works better.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Master.
I agree with a lot of the comments that Mark made, and that the two-story rooftop addition, I think the massing, I think it overwhelms the building.
Commissioner Lutfi.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with the comments as well. I definitely think it's important to have the simulated divided lights on those upper windows. And I also agree that I appreciate the fact that you are speaking in your design to sort of those original doors, but they seem disconnected from the historic building, and they need a little more something to make them speak to what was there originally, even though we don't know, but just conceptually. And the height is too, I agree with all the comments on the height.
And Commissioner Chen.
Yeah, seems like we are in agreement. I think the only comment seems to be whether Commissioner Ginsburg's suggestion for the windows be in the rear to be carried out. That's non-historic, but it's an excellent suggestion though.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we won't take an action today. We've given you some suggestions, particularly at the penthouse and bulkhead and lowering the height of that. And I know that there's a admirable goal with the louvers and the glass, but there is something scale-less about that. And maybe if there's a way to introduce some sort of scale so you can read that it's 2 stories, it might make it feel a little less looming. But I think in addition to that, you need to think about reducing the height. I think that's a common concern. And then some thoughts on the windows and doors as well. So we'll have you back as soon as you're ready. Okay, great. Thank you. And we'll move to the next and final item.
Yes, and that is public hearing item number 11, LPC 23-10373, an application for certificate of appropriateness in the Borough of Manhattan, block 1916, lot 17. 135 West 131st Street in the Central Harlem, West 130 to 132nd Street Historic District. A neo-Grec Queen Anne style row house designed by Jacob H. Valentine and built in 1888. The application is to alter the areaway, install a ramp, and construct a rooftop bulkhead.
Yeah, hi, good evening. And thank you very much for giving an opportunity to go over our presentation. This one is a relatively.
The record.
Yeah, hi, sir. Yeah. My name is Parag Mehta. I'm the architect. Along with me is Anna, and she worked on the job. This particular job is it's renovation of a brownstone. That problem was it needs a gut renovation, and we are proposing all new gut renovation with redoing the plans, which requires new certificate of occupancy. So currently it's an SRO, and now it's going to be rehabbed as 7 different units. It's in Manhattan on a very quiet block on 131 Street between Adam Clayton and Lenox. So what we see here is a historical picture of the building. And here is the building that's in context. Obviously, there is a building missing on the side, which is owned by a private entity, and it's the same size lot. Okay, I would like to go back to this side. So in this presentation, what we're seeking is an approval from the board here right now is the city requires us to make the lower level accessible. And we are proposing a ramp which leads to the lower level. Same time, it's required by city is that when we redo the building, we provide a bulkhead on top of the building. So here is a picture of the front yard of the building that shows 2 cheek wall with the sunken area to the bottom, which is the basement. Okay. Yeah, so 2 cheek walls, sunken area to the bottom. And here is the brownstone. Same time, we're looking at the entrance that's below the stoop. Again, a picture from the same area looking at the street. Okay, in our presentation, what we are referring to is like this building is flanked by very similar kind of building all through the block. So it's a similar building to the left, similar building to the right. And there are other buildings where we see that there was a need to remove the cheek wall, which is one right here. And there are a few more. The one here. One more example of the same thing. And after we put the ramp, we are trying to go down roughly around 24 inch. But by the time we reach to the stoop, for a head clearance, we need to enlarge the opening a little bit. That's the stoop that we're looking at. So for a height clearance, right around here, we are planning to raise this up somewhat to provide required height clearance. That's a bulkhead that's shown on the building. We placed the bulkhead far to the back as much as we could do because we have to leave the windows to the front and back habitable. So this one is the bulkhead far to the back, which is shown right here. Again, this is bulkhead on the rooftop. This picture shows existing condition and proposed condition. Here it shows two chick wall, of which we have to remove one. And obviously addition of bulkhead on the back. The railing that goes for the ramp, we are trying to minimize as many railing bars that we can eliminate. So here in the ramp, we eliminated the bar because it's hardly a drop. Though we need a ramp that's required by code, we can easily eliminate the central bar because there's no chance of somebody falling down or getting hurt. Here is a selection of stucco, which is, and we look at the proposed basement plan where we see the ramp. Then there's a landing which is required by code. Then there is one more ramp. Again, we get into the accessibility and going inside the building. We'll have an outdoor mailbox. And there's a requirement of planter box that's required by zoning code in this district. So we'll have to put some planters in the front yard. Lastly, yeah, here it shows the same stoop here. And it shows that it's opened up. And with this, I conclude the presentation. Any questions?
Okay, thank you. Do we have any questions, commissioners?
Yeah.
Yes, Commissioner Ginsburg.
The stone that you have to take out that's carved, could you keep it, turn it another way and keep it, have the clearance for the ramp while keeping the stone in some manner?
Yes, we were asked to do that. And we will do our best to use it. This stone, we'll try and use this stone symbol within the front yard.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? All right, let's move to public testimony, and I'll just note for the that there's nobody to take us through any remote participants.
Thank you, Chair Carroll. We have a couple of hands raised in the attendees list, so we'll be hearing from them. The first is John Graham from the Victorian Society in New York. So John Graham, I'm promoting you to panelist right now. And if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you will have 3 minutes to speak. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. John Graham for the Victorian Society in New York. While we do not oppose making historic structures more accessible and support the installation of this proposed ramp, we must express disappointment in losing the original block of carved masonry from the areaway wall of this Harlem brownstone. One of the most impressive architectural merits of Harlem is the neighborhood's multitude of relatively intact brownstone stoops, which were so often shorn off in other parts of Manhattan over the course of the mid-20th century. While we understand the ramp requires the areaway to be altered, it would be a shame for this piece of masonry to be completely lost. We would advise tweaking the design to try and save the block of masonry by repositioning it elsewhere at the stoop or areaway. Thank you very much, Commissioners.
Okay. Thank you so much for your testimony. And next up, we will be hearing from Lucy Levine from the Historic Districts Council. So Lucy Levine, I'm promoting you to panelist right now. And if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Hi, Commissioners. My name is Lucy Levine. I'm speaking on behalf of the Historic Districts Council. HDC is highly supportive of the applicant's effort to install a ramp in this areaway. Since we notice the installation of the ramp will require some removal of carved brownstone material, we wonder if it is possible for the applicant to find a reuse or relocation for the historic material. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for your testimony. I do not see any further hands raised on the attendees list, so I will bring it back to you, Chair Carroll.
Thank you very much. So I'd like to ask if you'd like to respond to the comments we've heard.
Just we can definitely try and bring that somewhere in our design further down into the lower area.
Into the lower level, you mean under the stoop perhaps? I don't know.
No, like essentially it's this piece that's removed, and we still do need steps here. So when we do go through our plan here, somewhere along this ramp, we can try and bring this piece and relocate it. And instead of putting above ground planters, maybe we can dig up that area and lower the planters into the ground. Again, planters are not chosen for us to be there. It's a part of zoning requirement that when there's a front yard, we do need planters.
Okay. All right. So, I mean, thank you for thinking of ways that you can integrate it. I think that will give people some comfort. All right, commissioners, any final comments? Okay, let's move to close the hearing. Commissioner Chen, would you make a motion to close the hearing?
So moved.
And Commissioner Lutfi, would you second that motion?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, so the hearing is closed, and we'll begin our discussion to incorporate a ramp within the areaway. This is something that we have routinely approved and in fact have rules at staff level to do it if it doesn't involve removing any fabric. In this case, it involves removing this piece of the cheek wall. I would note the commission has approved modifying fences and walls to provide barrier-free access in the past. But to the extent that the applicant is willing to explore integrating it somehow into the required planting, I think that would be welcome. Commissioner Lutfi, you have any other thoughts on the ramp?
I think Mark made an interest. Sorry.
Or just also a reminder about the stair bulkhead, which is more than visible through the gap view between buildings.
Thank you. I think Mark's suggestion about somehow incorporating it into the access ramp, if that's possible, it would sort of have a dual purpose and it could be reused in a very effective way. Makes sense. I think the question is whether or not that can be done working with staff or if we want them to come back. And then I understand that the visibility of the bulkhead is minimal. And it's a utilitarian, it's a accretion. And so I think it's fine.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Chen?
Yeah, I think the bulkhead is appropriate given the context, especially is obviously the visibility due to the vacant lot next door. I'm glad that the applicant is willing to incorporate the possibility of existing into the design.
Great. Commissioner Ginsburg.
Agree with my fellow commissioners. Appropriate.
Okay. And Commissioner Jefferson.
That's gone. Oh, I must commend this architect because he packed that little area away with green and ramps and geometry. He did a great job installing the ramp appropriate and the rooftop bulkhead absolutely appropriate. Well done.
Okay, thank you. And Commissioner Master.
I agree, appropriate for the rooftop bulkhead as well as the ramp.
Okay, thank you. All right, so I think we're in an agreement and can vote to approve this with the condition that they continue to explore with staff how they can incorporate the cheek wall into the plan.
So I guess that's me. Yes, sorry. In the matter of docket 23-10373, 135 West 131st Street, Central Harlem, West 130-132nd Street Historic District, neo-Grecque Queen Anne style row house designed by Jacob Valentine and built in 1888. The application is to alter the areaway, install a ramp, and construct a rooftop bulkhead. I note that the building style, scale, materials, and details are among the features that contribute to the special architectural and historic character of the Central Harlem West 130th to 32nd Street Historic District. I recommend approval, finding that the proposed rooftop bulkhead will only be seen at an oblique angle from a limited viewpoint through a gap between the building and its neighbor on West 131st Street. That the slope profile and tan stucco cladding of the proposed rooftop bulkhead will be in keeping with utilitarian rooftop accretions found throughout the historic district. That the proposed concrete ramp with simple metal railings in the areaway will provide barrier-free access in the least obtrusive manner and will be consistent with other areaways in the row in terms of materials and grade changes. That the houses in the row have a variety of areaway treatments, including low masonry walls and metal railings. Therefore, the removal of a portion of the areaway wall to access the ramp will not diminish unified treatment of areaways in the landscape. Because the applicant will be working with staff to effectively incorporate the cheek wall into the access ramp, so that the work overall will not detract from the special architectural of the historic character of the building or the streetscape. Thank you. And Commissioner Ginsburg, would you second that motion?
Second.
All right, Mark, will you call the vote?
Chair Carroll.
Aye.
Commissioner Chen.
Aye.
Commissioner Ginsburg. Aye. Commissioner Jefferson.
Aye.
Commissioner Lutfi.
Aye.
Commissioner Master.
Aye.
With 6 in favor and none opposed, the motion passes.
All right, great. Thank you. That's approved. Please continue to work with the staff to explore that, integrating that wall. And thank you all commissioners for sticking it out. It was a longer day than expected, so we appreciate all of your hard work. Thank you. And we'll see everybody next Tuesday.